Assalamu alaikum. This is part two. I'd say that I will basically talk to you about how youth have been basically exploited since the beginning of time and the different methodologies that were used to do so. In the old days, rulers used to give the impression that if you sacrifice the strongest young man and woman at the altar, there will be rain and there will be like lots of things will happen for the community, food and water and everything. And they drilled this into the parents and the community's head as leaders. What the people didn't realize is if you kill the strongest youth member, girl and boy, you have the rulers do not have any particular resistance. They have got the chance to control the people because the strongest female and male has been killed. So the uprise, the ability to uprise against the leader is in actual fact completely removed because the parents will believe this and the youth will be fearful because they don't know whether they are going to be sacrificed. And so the masses just submit to the king. And that was the first way of how people in actual fact made sure that they are in charge and they are leaders. You want to take something from a religious point of view? Or the history, the real history? Nabi Moses. He killed all the boys and left the girls to survive because he had an inkling that the boy is going to take over his kingdom. So it's not something new to make sure that the community reduces the power of the youth so that there is no uprising against the government. So that people themselves participate in actually destroying their own young people. So when the colonialists came along, they realized that indigenous people are self-sufficient. Their young children are being taught how to survive, and they sustain themselves. So what they did was, and in Canada they found out some terrible graves underneath schools. They removed the children from their parents. They taught them Christianity. And they made sure that the parents have got no support whatsoever, and they had to come and work for them as slaves, and as their particular workers to survive. And that creation of schools, with this kind of changing the religion even of the people, of the indigenous people, allowed them to control the people, the masses, and the resources as well. Because the indigenous people sat with the resources. They could live with the actual environment effectively and sustain themselves and spend most of the time enjoying themselves because they know how to live from the land. Our children from schools now don't even know how to, some of them, bake an egg. Okay, so the best way to break a community is to reduce their youth's power. And schools do exactly that. They remove the student from the particular community, from the youth, from the children from their communities, inform them about things which is totally different to self-sustainability. And then they give them the certificate, that you're going to get in order to get the job, knowing that there is no job at the end of the road. Because by the time those children finish grade 12, the economy has changed already. So in real terms, the Western education failed for the masses, but it succeeded for the elite. It is actually designed for that particular purpose, to make sure that the masses become obedient citizens, vote for them, to speak for them, and then they rip the people off. So that's the reality of schooling, okay, is to make sure that the learners do not learn the skills of survival. And so they can manipulate through water, electricity, and markets, etc., and keep people in that particular system of education. So schools, in actual fact, and universities is a holding ground to prevent a run on the market. And what the market does, and what the business do, is they invest into technology. So it's designed that way to create a pool of unemployment so that the people are kept under control. Now, knowing that, it makes us like, what are we doing? We're actually supporting the whole system. Now, in the old days, the colonialists in Cape Town really feared the Muslims because the Muslims would fight against colonialism in Indonesia and those places. And they would fight to die because they know if they die, they go to heaven. So they had to send them here to a furthest place, so that there's no uprising there. But when they were here, they were given freedom. So to believe and to practice, Sheikh Yusuf was allowed to, his followers came with him, with the family, and he taught Islam. Simon van der Stel actually, welcomed him on the shore when he arrived. So there was this fear for Muslims. And when the Muslims arrived, you had, before they arrived, Jan van Riebeeck asked them to come to build Cape Town for them, because he lost lots of his men in the storms, and he couldn't take slaves, and he couldn't make slaves, and he couldn't bring slaves because he was a prisoner himself. So he asked for the Muslims to come, asked his government to send the Mardekas, the Amboyans, and then before that, they will give them property, and they will give them land, and they will give them wages, etc., to work and develop the Cape. And in return, they had a placard saying the Muslims nobody must disturb their faith, and they're allowed to freely believe. And so the Muslims had enormous amount of madrasas started, etc. And some of the people, some of the colonialists became Muslims, some of the Africans became Muslim, some of the slaves became Muslim, some of the local people became Muslim. So then the government said, no, we must now create our own schools because when people are becoming Muslim. And so what they did was to say to the people, the Muslims cannot go further than grade 5, standard 3. If they want to go to grade standard 4, that time, which is grade 6, they must become Christian. What our forefathers did was amazing. They just said, okay, fine, keep your education. We'll teach our own children the craft, and our craft master is going to teach them about the faith, and Allah will give them sustenance. And they basically removed the children from the schools, and they taught them the skills. And up till today, the Muslims control the building market because of their skills. And they developed their own guild system, and they became an economic system and a legal system on their own. So that is the kind of way how they survived, by not submitting to the system and then becoming completely useless with their hands. I remember a professor who wanted to put a shelf on the wall and he hit a 6-inch wooden nail into the wall. The professor didn't know how to put a shelf in. So education in itself actually removes your ability to do things and to sustain yourself. You're sitting with a pen as your heaviest thing that you pick up, and a teacher with a piece of chalk or the whiteboard marker. And furthermore, the at home, the hinge of the cupboard is still broken. Nobody wants to pay $2.50 and put it in because nobody knows how to do it. So this is the reality of what we are all part of, and then we have this fancy arguments, fancy discussions, But we only realize that we are trapped. And so the academic world in itself, there's professors and the doctorate and all the people that are writing these theses, etc., they're actually controlled also They can only write it in the manner in which the academia tells them to write. They mustn't be creative. Creativity is not accepted in academia because where's your reference? Where's your footnotes? And I once said to a guy, he said, talk to me about my work. And I said to him, where do you get? I said, it's creative thinking, you must think a little bit with the top of your head and with the heart, stop using footnotes, you're going to get confused. And so the structure of the academia actually just keeps everybody in a loop, and nobody can actually develop really. In actual fact, one of the professors that I was very close to, he said to me before he passed away, he said to me, this is a waste of time. I'm spending my time writing articles just to maintain my associate professorship. My life is going by. And this is just trapping me. And this is the reality. And so we argue, my argument is, and your argument is, and so, but they're actually useless to society because society in actual fact is not gaining from them because the system of academia is to develop people with the right policies for government. That is where they get their income from. So it's about keeping people in a loop and making them dependent on funding. And when the funding in actual fact is there, it manipulates the research. So the funding controls the masses, basically. So the elite controls the masses. They buy the political parties. They make sure that they're in the education and decide what must be in the education, etc. They run the markets, etc. And so they even develop a quota system who becomes this, that, and that, and that. So as long as you're in that loop, you are actually part and parcel of that system that makes people basically retard the society. So in real term, Western education has succeeded for the elite, and because it was designed to fail the masses, unless the masses realize, hey, but we can do better than this. We can actually, transcend. And if you look at your people that have done tremendous work, like Einstein and Edison, they didn't go to school. They were actually put out of school because they were creative thinkers and they developed things. So schools actually, one writer wrote, you stop learning when you go to school. In the 1960s, there were a lot of writers who wrote about de-schooling, right? And many people just take no notice of it because the system is designed in such a way that it boosts your ego. It allows you to get your PhD and your 80%, your 90%, etc., so that you can boast to people about your achievements. But that's what it does. It creates an individual that becomes a capitalist, that will even stand against his own family in order to make money. This creates a kind of competition in capitalism that makes the world what it is today, this kind of money-mongering kind of society that is cutthroat in terms of resources, killing people in order to get the world and get the riches of the world. And that is the life of a disbeliever. So a disbeliever will always try to create an educational system that takes people away from their faith. And the best way to take people away from their faith is to break it up into pieces. Break learning up into pieces, and you break the holistic feature or the unity of knowledge. And then the people cannot connect with the creator because now they are so separated that they start competing with each other. So very well-known Professor Noam Chomsky, who was basically a linguist, analyzing languages. He made a point for saying that you don't get a standard language. Language changes all the time. So why is there a concept of standardized language? Standardized language is a feature that is created so that examinations are written in the language of the oppressor, so that everybody else's language is being derided and denied, so that he cannot in actual fact achieve the actual marks in the actual pass marks. This is part of the manipulation, standardizing the language, standardizing education. So then we come to the point of examinations. Examinations is the main feature that manipulates people. It creates so much fear in people that they cannot think, that they become irrational. And then now this particular part of the frontal lobe does not develop, so the back lobe develops, which is the brain that deals with fear and fright and flight. And if you take any particular person in this westernized community, not Western community, westernized community, because there are even Eastern people that have been westernized, their brains as young people will show that the frontal lobe is less developed than the back lobe. And they call that adolescence. And they say in psychology, it is a developmental stage. It's not. It's an illness of people that have been pressurized by examinations and fear and control that they cannot, as young people, develop. You don't find that kind of brain amongst indigenous people. They've got a full holistic brain, fully developed. They know exactly how to survive. They get married very early. They are part of the community. They sustain the community. The moment you break that and you create the educational system, you will create the illness of adolescence. So adolescence is not a developmental stage. It is, in actual fact, an illness of the Western world created through schools and universities. Because as long as you can keep them at a school and university, the more you can keep them off the market, because there will always be an increase in the unemployment rate amongst the school leavers, because it is designed that way, because then they can control the parents with lower wages, increase the money needed for basic things such as water, electricity, etc. Keep people in debt, and that's how you actually whip people in obedience. So when you talk about school readiness, you're talking about getting a child ready to obey. It's got nothing to do with school readiness and learning, etc. The child's been learning since day one. So education, in terms of its structure, in terms of the way it develops, it strokes the ego. So parents start arguing with one another. Oh, my child is going to this particular school, and he had so many grades, etc., etc., and all of those kind of stuff. And some people even boast about, oh, my child's going to psychologist. Yeah, so because they even got that into people's minds, that if you can't sit still, you got to go to a psychiatrist, and get Ritalin, and then destroy people in terms of making them drug addicted. Many children have been destroyed because they are active people, they're normal, but they don't follow the requirements of the classroom. Sit still and listen to me. So, and then when you come to university again, they play the game of, freedom and fighting for the rights of people, etc., etc. You still have to write exams. What some of the guys do, they play cards all the time in the cafe, and they steal the books of other people that go to lectures, and then the other people, in actual fact, have a problem with the exams because they've stolen some of their books, or they borrow the books and they never give it back. But that's the competition you see at university level. And the university level is another kind of competition for funding again. And they start messing around with one another. Sometimes they steal one another's particular information. I've spoken to a PhD in biochemistry. He said to me, if I have my life over, I'll become a person that works in a video store, because my superiors are stealing my research and then getting the funding for it. So so Noam Chomsky says, the academia is the gatekeeper of capitalism. And what is happening actually is that you make your professors and your doctors, they become the lords now. They decide now what is right and what is wrong. And you forget about the religion, because philosophy actually is actually an antithesis to religion, because they don't want to listen to the prophets in terms of what is truth. No. They want to create a philosophy about what is truth. And so I find it difficult to get Muslims say about Islamic philosophy. It's something like that. You can't Islamize something, a science that's actually going against the truth. And then obviously you get psychology is an outflow from philosophy, and sociology is an outflow from psychology, and and you get that whole cycle of different ologies, but it separates learning into different compartments. By doing that and not getting the tawheed, the unity of the learning, you actually break the personality of a person, because he becomes so competitive in protecting his little bit of unit that he knows about, that he becomes like selfish. He cannot see it from the other point of view. So it is important to become multi-skilled. I'm very, very, very grateful, alhamdulillah, that I have pushed myself into that realm due to the Quran. I realize that if you don't understand as many sciences as possible, you cannot tafsir the Quran properly, because it touches on so many things in one ayah, in one particular ayah. That brings me to a point I want to tell all the people that are imams not to use the word verse for ayah, because Allah says in Surah Yasin, this is not poetry. So you can't use the term of poetry into an ayah. An ayah actually means a miracle, a marvel. If you want to say now, okay, well, how is that correct in terms of thinking? Allah says, whoever rejects my ayat, I'll put him in Jahannam. So it translated into common English, whoever rejects my verse will go into Jahannam. It doesn't make sense. But if you say, whoever rejects my miracles will go into Jahannam, now it's another form of thinking. And that just takes you out of your compartmentalization, which is designed in terms of capitalism to control people, divide and rule. So in order to get people to maintain or to get back into their creativity, is to combine things, is to unify things again. That's why Allah says in the Quran, He's going to test those who break the Quran into pieces. So you need to see the Quran into its holistic feature and then take it from there. That's what all the scholars did, Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Arabi, etc., Ibn Sina. They took the Quran and they took from the Quran and they went to research the features the Quran speaks about and kept it within the Quran's Tawheed, the unity of the Quran. So there is already an indication. What I'm talking about is that you can develop your country without voting, because voting is part of the disempowerment of people. If you can sit back and you vote for other people to do what you can do, then obviously you are going to become selfish. And you're going to spend your time arguing with a few different parties, and it's exactly what the elite wants, because the elite is making money out of your argumentation. And the height of argumentation is wars. And the elite will pay both sides and provide arms to both sides and create the war on top of it. They have no particular respect for human life. So if you become, as a people, incapacitated to defend yourself and to look after yourself, and you depend on other people to do it, then obviously you're going to be abused. So education is that particular feature that traps you and makes you incapacitated to do things which is simple in life, that you can create your own water, you can create your own electricity, you can create your own food if you're prepared to work. But education by itself makes you lazy. It makes you sit with a book all the time, and other people are publishing books, about self-empowerment, self-this and self-that. But you're sitting actually still, and you're becoming an armchair critic, and the house is falling to pieces because you can't even fix a ceiling or something like that. So it is important then to come to a point where you but skill our people. Now, this was the beauty of the Burqa craftsmen of the Muslims. They empowered themselves to do craftsmanship. And so they could sustain themselves, and they could give jobs to people, and people became Muslim because of that. And they could feed themselves because they have Hadat every Thursday night. And it was a kind of a food supply for the community all the time. So the authorities admired them because they had a tremendous amount of support, and they developed themselves at that level that the colonists have to come to them for their dresses, for their suits, for their houses, etc. And they had to admit the fact that even though these people have no certificates from an educational institution, they have the skill to make things happen. And this is where I'm leading our people to say you can develop and advance a community without voting. Because voting is part of the disorientation of a community. It makes them argue all the time, allow them not to use their resources. And now the funding from the elite, in actual fact, makes sure that they can, in actual fact, make money out of the crime, out of the disorientation, the illnesses, etc., that come from creating this competitive nature that comes from schools, My child got 82% and my child got 84. He's got more than you. So the main feature is that education itself, based on examination, is the greatest disservice to a community and disempowers them. Because examination is based on memory, okay? Not necessarily on skills. So, and not necessarily on development of step-by-step proficiency. So what happens is you go into an exam and then you forget immediately because it's only your short-term memory that is taking that in, and not your long-term memory of your skills that actually, in fact, allows you to become a professional or professional in what you're doing. So let's take driving as an example. If I teach you driving in this way, today I'm going to teach you how to switch a car on. Tomorrow, teach you how to steer. The next day, I'm going to teach you how to put your clutch in. Will you ever be able to drive? You cannot drive because you get taught piecemeal. Similarly, if you teach piecemeal in mathematics, you will not become a mathematician. And because you haven't practiced enough. So you find, for instance, a grade 12 learner who doesn't pass maths, who doesn't have a low mark for maths or physics or whatever the case may be. The mistakes he made in his paper was grade 8 work that he missed to multiply by -1 or to change the subject of the formula. And it's not the grade 12 work which he learned in 6 months. No, it's the work from grade 8 that he has forgotten. And that's another internal infrastructure of which makes education fail itself. But then again, as I said, it fails for the community, but it doesn't fail for the elite because they actually aimed it like that. The sad part of it is that at the beginning of educational schools development in Britain, it was actually started by people who felt sorry for the children who were working in the mines. Children were dying in the mines with their parents working together in the mines. And some rich people came together and lobbied the fact to create, to take the children out of the mines and create another form of learning about the mines in schools. Unfortunately, it developed into what we have today, where it's totally disconnected to the survival of people. So now, if you understand that background, then you realize how dangerous education is, how dangerous schooling is, how dangerous universities are when you start specializing people in different fields where they confuse people more. And within the same field, you have different people developing new terminologies. And my argument is, on some platform, and everybody else is ha. So I wrote a book now, which is based on terminology, where you confuse people with terminology. And I was amazed that I actually found another article written by psychologists with 50 terms in psychology and psychiatry that are actually not true, that is used generally by doctors and by professionals and by patients and by communities. And it actually doesn't mean anything. It's actually a lie. And they work with manipulation of terms. So there you go. And that's psychology and psychiatry. Simply because they don't believe in the soul, which is unseen. They believe that the mind and the brain is the main thing, not realizing there's something beyond the brain. It's actually the soul that instructs the body. We'll get to that some other time. But we're dealing with education. So education primarily is aimed at separating certain things, creating a disunity. And in that disunity of the different sciences, it actually creates a devalue of learning. It devalues the learning. So if you want to change the community and you want to change the society, it is best to actually allow everybody to do everything that they want to do and skill everybody in a minute manner, step by step, and take out the exams, but replace it with tests. Every test of the way, every step of the way. And that's what we do at Iqra University. We don't go to the next step unless everybody understands step one. Unless step one has been further simplified in order to do the next. And we don't do any curriculums except grade 12, except the highest level. And we simplify the highest level into its 20 steps, not 4, so that the learner can start from 13 years old already, developing the skill and working on a grade 12 level. And this develops an enormous amount of self-esteem, Because now a young child can actually help an older child. So the aim of Iqra HL University is to create tutors, people that are holistic methodologists that can teach anything from all angles. And then it blows the mind of the parents and the communities, and it empowers them to be able to do anything they want to, and then also find the specific skill that they have, that God has given them, that Allah has given them a specific skill that they can in actual fact then master, but they master it after having an holistic understanding of the whole particular feature as far as possible. That is how the ulama of the past, the scholars of the past, were first Hafiz al-Quran, very good with the Arabic language. After that, they would specialize, but they've got a basic core foundational knowledge. Now you can specialize. But if you specialize before you have a foundational knowledge, you've got a problem. You can't go into hadith, for instance, but you don't know the history and the tafsir and not Hafiz al-Quran. It's very difficult to do that because now you only have one little strand. So it's also interesting to note that if Muslim institutions mold themselves on Western institutions and Islamize it, they fall into the same trap. The sad part of it is they actually charge the same amount of fees. And that's like, what is the fees about? So the fees in education also make sure that the elite and the middle class and the poor and the elite can actually manipulate the economy. And we suffer by that because people that don't have will take from those who don't have. So your crime rate is going to increase if you continuously develop this kind of thinking of separating learning, making learning expensive, etc., and not giving the people their haq or their right in terms of learning what they're interested in. So this is where we need to be able to say, I identify that examinations is a problem in education. It actually reduces the quality of education because examination has nothing to do with development of quality of learning. It is a system of monitoring and separating people into the 40% and the 60% and the 80% so that you can have this kind of poor, the cleaners, with all due respect to the cleaners that haven't had the money to learn further or had different problems, and then your producers and then your managers. And the elite, who is the top guys, they don't even have some kind of degree. They just have the money to manipulate and buy people. And that's the reality. So if you look at the certifications that we're talking about, then there's a lot of people that are certificated with no jobs. So what you call in economics, they're underemployed. They're employed in something like, they have a matric, but they must do something like clean up or something like that, or be a packer. And that is insulting to our communities. And we need to get ourselves out of that particular mindset and make it available to everybody, because everyone is a gem. Everyone has got something that nobody else has got. And we need to find that. We need to get our people, our children, and our students to get to that point where they, in actual fact, can find that specific skill that Allah has given them. So how do they manipulate the youth from not slaughtering them at the altar? They have schools and universities where they slaughter themselves in terms of their minds and their hearts and their souls. Because before they know it, they're totally confused. There are children who have been to university who don't practice Islam anymore. Because they believe, in individualistic thinking and critical thinking. Not realizing that the critical thinking is actually only one side of the brain that is being used, not both sides of the brain. So we need to be able to know also that education is left lobe centered. It's only about the critical thinking. It doesn't apply to the right lobe, which is the holistic, artistic side. And it integrates both sides, and it really develops a kind of a holistic integration of things. And that becomes only possible with spiritual stimulation and spiritual thinking. And spiritual thinking comes only when you start reducing your dependency on the material world and go into the realm of joy and gratitude. That is where you change and bring the two brains, half of the brains together. Anything else short of that creates a problem. So you see, I'm leading now to the next stage, which is like, how do you advance a country without voting? Because as you can see now, the voting system and the educational system and the economic system, and it's all connected in order to keep the masses down and to keep a few only to succeed and to make money. I hope I've opened up some of the newest things, inshallah. But not new, but I mean, just to bring a little bit of perspective to it so that we can start appreciating the work that I've done over 28 years and 30 years to try and really accelerate the learning, develop our community on a fast scale, on all levels, children and youth and adults and communities, all at the same time. And not say, no, we must first develop our youth, and our youth is the future. That's all a bunch of nonsense, because the adults are just sitting back now and saying, okay, you can do that, the youth. But on another side, they say, you're not responsible yet. So we're confusing our youth. We need to work together. We need to work together because we need each other in order to take it to the next step, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum. Shukran.